distinguished speaker who says that the late science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke once said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." It really does seem that way, doesn't it? Every new technology seems more mysterious, and many of them are so mysterious to us that they seem just magical. For example, it's magic. For example, can you explain what happens when you make a cell phone call? Probably not. This evening, Lloyd Smith will be doing the elective project required in Level 4 of the Presentation Mastery Plan. He will discuss a technology that has been around for nearly 75 years. It's an important enough technology that it actually dominated their lives in many ways for all of that time. However, nearly no one seems to understand how it works. After his speech, there will be a question and answer session. Lloyd Smith and the Black Box.
You might be wondering, what is the technology that's dominated all of our lives for nearly 75 years? The answer is atomic weapons. They were first introduced to mankind, or thrust upon mankind, as you wish, right around, August of 1945, at the end of World War II. Since then, they've actually dominated the politics and in many ways the economic situation in the world. We've all been living under that threat. Most of you aren't old enough to remember this, but there was once a time when once a week, everybody in elementary schools had to crawl under their desks to practice what would happen in the event of a nuclear attack. I had to do that because I lived in Spokane. The theory was that the Russians would attack Fairchild Air Force Base, and all of us would crawl under our desks, and then after the attack, we'd come out and do something or other we were never really sure of, because the whole place would have probably been a smoking mess. Anyway, the question is this: do you know how an atomic bomb works? And the answer is probably not. It does seem like a black box, a mysterious black box. So my goal tonight is to teach you how not just the atomic bomb, but a thermonuclear weapon, a hydrogen bomb, works. And that black box is actually very, very easy to understand. It's just that it's very difficult to make one in the real world. Now, the object of our discussion tonight is going to be something called a W-88, which is the current day, or the most current modern American thermonuclear weapon. There's a lot that's secret about nukes, but 75 years, a lot of details have crept out too. For example, about 5 years ago, somebody screwed up and published a picture of several technicians standing around a W-87 nuclear weapon. Well, that fits in the same case that a W-88 goes in. And so from the picture, it's easy to tell how big this thing is. Think about this for a moment. It's about 30 inches long, so it's about that long. It's about 15 inches in diameter, about that big. It's vaguely peanut-shaped, kind of two lumps in a sort of a tube. And it explodes with the power of 450 kilotons. Okay, kilo is 1,000, so that's 450,000 tons of TNT, 900,000 pounds. Think about that for a moment. And that explosion happens in an area about this big in a fraction of a second. This is an imposing weapon. It's not anywhere near the largest nuclear weapon ever set off, but it can do enough to really wreck your day if it goes off. So let's think how one of these things works. Okay, very simple idea when you hear it. First of all, if you opened it up, you would see something they call a pit. It's actually a metal sphere, a titanium alloy sphere, about as big around as a grapefruit. It's extremely precisely spherical. It has to be to within just a few 10,000ths of an inch in order for the thing to work. It's a hollow sphere. On the inside of the sphere, there's a coating about 3/4 of an inch thick of plutonium. Plutonium is a man-made element, doesn't exist in nature. Extremely hazardous stuff, very radioactive, very toxic, and highly explosive, just in a conventional sense, too. It's a metal, but machining it is really risky to do. Around the outside of the sphere are a whole bunch of what they call lensed explosives. These are ordinary explosives, like dynamite, except something much more sophisticated than that. They're called lensed, not because they go through glass, but because they're focused. The idea is that when each one of these little explosive lenses blows up, it'll shove its area of that metal sphere to exactly the center of the sphere. Now, in order for the bomb to work, every one of these has to go off at precisely the same moment. So there's a bunch of complex electronics to set off these little explosions all at once. When they go off, that grapefruit-sized sphere is compressed down to about the size of a grape. And what that does is squishes all the plutonium together, and it becomes what is called a critical mass. In a critical mass, the neutrons that are normally given off by the plutonium start hitting the nucleus of the atoms that are next to them, breaks them apart, more neutrons fly out, they hit the nucleus of other atoms, and so on and so on. And that's a nuclear chain reaction. In a nuclear reactor, it happens steadily. In a nuclear bomb, it's an uncontrolled nuclear reaction, and it causes the thing to explode with an incredible release of energy and radioactivity and whatnot. Now, if you stop right at that point, that's a regular nuclear bomb, the kind that was exploded in actually Nagasaki in 1945. But a thermonuclear weapon, like our W-88 frame, has below it a second stage. That's a hollow tube made out of plutonium with another hollow tube called a spark plug in the middle of it. It's not a spark plug like in a car. It doesn't give off sparks. I don't know why they call it a spark plug. And then between the two tubes, the outside tube and the inside tube, is filled with something called lithium deuterium. And that's an alloy of lithium and deuterium, however you say it, which is an isotope of hydrogen. So when the first bomb goes off, there's something in between it and that tube called an interstage. And that's one of the most closely guarded secrets in all of America. If I actually knew how it worked and told you, I'd be violating the Espionage Act and I'd end up in prison. You would actually be violating it by hearing it too, so we could all be roomies, maybe. But anyway, this mysterious thing somehow focuses most of the explosive power from the regular nuclear weapon into this tube. It causes the lithium deuterium to be compressed extremely highly. When the atoms are shoved together, they merge or fuse. That's why it's called a fusion weapon. And it gives off a tremendous amount of energy, 450 kilotons in this case. This all happens in the space of a tiny fraction of a second, like about 100th of a second or so. Now, as you might expect, these things are really hazardous to have go off, but they're actually extremely hazardous to build as well. And a lot of what the pollution down in the Hanford works is left over from the making of the uranium bomb that was used in Hiroshima during World War II, and that stuff is going to be around for a long, long time. Now, what does this all mean in a practical sense? Not much, except if a bunch of these things go off, it's the end of the world as we know it, that's for sure. But think about this too. Even though these things have been around for about 75 years, they've never been used. That's because they're such terrible weapons, nobody can use them. That's what's called mutually assured destruction, which was the philosophy, the defense philosophy of all of the nuclear countries on Earth for about those 75 years. So now you know how a nuclear weapon works. You're not going to be building one in your garage or anything because you lack the sophisticated engineering and the machining and whatnot. And besides, the radioactivity would kill you anyway. Thanks, Master.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Yeah, now say that there's a question and answer period.
Before they get to...
Yes.
We will now have a question.
Okay, and Steve, this should be max 10 minutes. Okay. So, Joe.
The phrase dirty bomb has been thrown around a lot in the last decade or so. Can you give us an idea of the dirty bomb, the differences between that
Sure.
and what you were describing?
Yeah, dirty bomb is not a nuclear weapon at all. What it is actually the regular explosives like dynamite or something with a whole bunch of radioactive stuff. A perfect source would be medical waste, like from a hospital, from radiation therapy machines, x-ray machines, that kind of thing. You just pack it in the box, set the explosion off, it just blows the stuff all over the place and contaminates a big area. That's the kind of weapon a terrorist could make. This notion that you're going to have a terrorist make a real live nuclear weapon, that's just silly. That just can't happen. They're not sophisticated enough to do it. But anyway, a dirty bomb is radioactive, but it's not a nuclear weapon.
Lloyd, how do they keep the plutonium stable? Because you said that was obviously very...
With great difficulty.
Yeah.
Plutonium is a metal, and it will actually burst into flames when it's being worked if there's the slightest issue with it. It's really hazardous to work with. I don't know the techniques, and I don't want to get close enough to it to find out, to tell you the truth. Plutonium has a half-life of about 100,000 years. That means it would take, if we had a blob of it sitting here, well, if we had a blob of it sitting right here, we'd all be dead of radiation poisoning within a couple of days. But anyway, what that means, the half-life means that in about 100,000 years, half of it will no longer be radioactive.
Why don't they just say it's got a life of 2,000 years?
Well, half-life is a way to measure how nuclear material degrades. See, each 100,000 years, half of whatever you've got becomes non-radioactive. It transmutes into lead, but it does that by giving off its radiation. That's why it's dangerous to be around. That would ruin your day too, to be around that.
When it gives off the radiation from the explosion, and it filters through the air, and it comes to the ground, what safety net do you have? Is your home a safety net, or is it the bunker that you have to have in the ground to protect yourself from this happening?
It depends on how close you are to the actual center of the explosion. 450 kiloton bomb, if you're within about 2 miles of the place in the air where it blows up, you're incinerated anyway. There isn't anything there won't be anything left. I mean, even dirt will burn. It's so hot. It's hotter than the surface of the sun when it goes off. But if you're far enough away, about 4 or 5 miles away, actually just staying inside would work. The big danger that a lot of people would face being, say, 6 or 8 or 10 miles away, where the radiation would not be so much of a factor, is that when they saw the flash and heard the sound, they'd probably run to their windows to find out what was going on, and then the shock wave would blow the glass of the windows in on them. That actually happened to us. Remember in Russia a couple of years ago when that asteroid exploded up in the air? 1,500 people got hurt by flying glass because they saw the flash and ran to their windows, and then the shock wave blew the glass in on them. But it turns out that crawling under your desk at a school would really work if you were far enough away from it.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's good to know.
I never believed it back in the day.
No, I didn't either. It would actually.
Well, can you share with us any thoughts or any information you have on the Fukushima meltdown as was described in the news, and how that level of radiation has traveled ocean water, air, jet stream, western United States?
No, it's two totally different things. I mean, that wasn't a nuclear explosion at all. That was just the core of the reactor melted down because the cooling water was disrupted by the earthquake and the tidal wave. That was a monster earthquake that did that to them over there. But it does illustrate what can happen in the event of nuclear fallout. If you blew up an atomic bomb above ground, you're going to get that typical mushroom cloud that you see. That's actually, the blast goes out, it's sucked back in, it picks up dirt and burned buildings and incinerated cows and people and everything. And it goes up in the air, and it gets to a certain point, and it's so heavy, the air gets thinner, and the cloud collapses into that mushroom shape. Well, that stuff starts drifting around. It's dust, but it's radioactive dust, and it can go forever. When Russia and the U.S. were testing nuclear weapons above ground until about, I think it was the late 70s, give or take, around in there, there were traces of those tests that would go everywhere. The U.S. was testing them in the Nevada desert, close to Las Vegas. People in Las Vegas would go out on the patios and watch the mushroom clouds and whatnot as entertainment. And the leukemia rate in the Las Vegas area spiked up, childhood leukemia especially, because there was a contaminant called strontium-90 that ended up being in the milk supply. It was attracted to the grass or something. I'm not sure the mechanism, but anyway, that's what did it. So the Fukushima thing isn't a nuclear explosion at all, but it does illustrate a real problem if you set off a whole bunch of nukes. There are many fewer nukes than there were before the U.S. and Russia negotiated treaties back in the Reagan era, actually. There used to be about 50,000 nuclear weapons. Now there are about 1,500 total, which is still enough to really do a bunch of harm.
Seems like after they got going on manufacturing the bombs down in Hanford, there's a reference to the downwinders,
Yeah.
the people that theoretically were guinea pigs possibly,
Yeah.
even because there's conjecture out there that they were flying in the air and releasing this material to see what the effects might be. Any reality to that?
I don't believe that. They're called downwinders because the prevailing winds, they look downwind of the Hanford facility, and I think it was just contamination from that. It's pretty windy down in that area. It's just flat, like trackless wasteland, really. That's why they put that in there. And by the way, the city of Richland only had about 1,000 people before the nuclear project went in there. The Tri-Cities are there because of the nuclear project. And I just don't buy the conspiracy theory. I think the real world version is that there was just radioactivity and dust and crap escaped and it blew downwind. Statistically, if you lived downwind of that plant, you had a far better chance of ending up with some kind of cancer than not.
Which apparently there's
Yeah.
statistical
Right.
data.
Lloyd, so who is the keeper of the secret? Is it an agency?
The U.S. Department of Energy. Everybody thinks the Department of Energy was created, for energy, like, power grids and stuff like that. No, it was created it actually owns all of the nuclear weapons. The military doesn't own the nuclear weapons. They're under civilian control, and that's part of the constitutional notion that the commander-in-chief should be an elected civilian, the president. He appoints the Secretary of Energy and so on. In the past administration, the Obama administration, the Secretary of Energy was Dr. Stephen Chu, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. I mean, this guy knew his stuff. The current one is Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas.
And that really bothers me.
And he actually is in command of all of the nuclear weapons. Don't let it bother you. He once took chemistry in college and got a C.
Oh, yeah, he gets it.
Nobel Prize-winning physicist, the guy who got a C in college chemistry. It's about the same.
And so are we the only country that has these weapons?
Oh, no. No, right now, thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, obviously the U.S. and Russia, but also Great Britain, France, China, India definitely, Pakistan maybe not. There's some disagreement over that. North Korea definitely not, even though they claim it. They have regular nuclear weapons. Israel does have thermonuclear. And so far, those
But they did not admit that.
No, Israel won't confirm or deny.
So,
neither will the U.S. The U.S. technically, the U.S. doesn't say that it has any nuclear weapons at all. They don't make any comments, confirmations, or denials about where they are or anything. When they flew B-52s out of Fairchild, they had nuclear-armed cruise missiles hanging under the wings, but they didn't admit that those missiles even existed, even though you could see the planes going over with them. Yeah.
So you said there's less than there used to be?
Oh, yeah.
What did they do with them to get rid of them?
They dismantled them.
Oh, you can dismantle?
Sure, you can unbuild anything you can build. That's even more dangerous than building.
I was going to
Turns
say,
out,
Whoops.
Yeah, interestingly enough, this may sound...
Terry's taking it
Yeah,
to Heinz's garage.
You don't want to be close to one of those when they open it up, Interestingly enough, nuclear weapons wear out just sitting there. Like my friend, the W-88 that described, the lithium deteriorate in it only lasts 12 and a half years. So once every 12 and a half years, you have to unbuild the bomb, put it back together with fresh materials. The last bill that President Obama signed before he left office was an authorization to rebuild all of America's nuclear weapons. It's going to be over about a 10-year period, cost almost $1 trillion. But if we don't do it, the bombs will just become lumps of metal, is what it amounts to. They wouldn't blow up. And they, just sitting there, they lose their radioactivity and have to be rebuilt. Any other
I
questions?
just have one more
Oh,
question, sorry.
okay.
So how do
Make
they,
it fast.
how do they, like,
Faster,
what
faster.
device do they use, like, to set them off? You know, do they put it in, do they put it in a plane, do they put it
Yes.
Submarine.
You could put it in anything.
Okay.
Most of the American arsenal right now is submarine launch
Okay.
ballistic missiles. If you go over to the Hood Canal, every now and then you can see one of the missile submarines just below the surface heading out toward the ocean. They spend 3 or 4 months cruising up and down in the Pacific. There's another base over at Groton, Connecticut. Those submarines in those 2 bases have more explosive power in the missiles than all of the bombs that were set off in all of World War II worldwide.
That's Bangor.
Yeah, Bangor
Bangor
is the
base,
base.
that's over by,
Hood Canal. It's on the Hood Canal.
thank you.
Please take a moment and write down your comments on the Lloyd.